Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. Tonight we have with us Glynnie Walford from Martin Collins, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about the common mistakes when building and maintaining the outdoor arena. If you guys have questions, there's a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen there. Feel free to put any questions in there, and we'll get those at the end of the sessions tonight. But for right now, I'm going to hand it over to Glynnie, and we'll let her take it away.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, good evening, everybody, and I've been delighted to talk to you about this whole topic because we do get a lot of questions on it on a daily basis, actually, which is quite interesting from various states. So what I'm going to do is take you through the presentation. We've got some slides here, and we've also got some pictures too, which I hope you'll find of interest in being able to describe what it is we're actually talking about. So if we go to slide number 1, which is construction, let's talk about the seasons. I think it's very important to, if you can, very important to try and plan ahead. And a lot of what I'm going to say is probably common sense and you've thought about it anyway, but I just feel it's crucial that we reiterate certain things. So bear in mind that obviously the best season for you to construct in is when the weather is good. So springtime through summer into fall. It's much easier for the machines actually to be able to do, for instance, cut and fill work, drainage, that sort of thing in good weather. There's less mess, when you're moving a lot of fill material, and obviously the ground is more stable. If, however, you're forced into being able to construct in, winter time, that can, pose a few problems. So just try and bear in mind that if you can plan ahead and you can go for that good weather period, that's the time to do it. So choosing a location, this is something where you want to take a lot into consideration. You want to think about the size that you want to build. You want to think about where you want to build it on your farm. You want to think about the distance from the arena to the barn. You want to think about trees and tree belts, not only for leaf contamination, but also bear in mind, obviously, trees have really quite long roots. So that's an important point. And also think about the prevailing weather conditions, where the your worst weather comes in from. And we'll go on to actually some other considerations in a moment. And they also on that slide, you'll see selecting a contractor. What I would say here is do some homework. Before you select your contractor, really check them out. If you've got somebody in mind, then get from them, and I can't stress the importance of this enough, get from them some referral sites where they've built, clients' names, telephone numbers, so that you can actually talk to those people and find out how the contractor was to work with. Did they do, were they professional? Were they considerate? They didn't have to be micromanaged. Their quotations were set out in detail, so you could see exactly what you were getting for your money and what they were going to be building and how they were going to be building it. And then also try and visit some of those sites so that you can actually see the finished product. So I can't stress the importance of that enough when you're selecting a contractor. Now, your other, there's a little picture here that we've just slotted in here, and you can see where the arena was built there. It's sheltered. You do have a tree belt, so this particular client had to take into consideration that that leaf fall was going to have to be blown or raked up once the leaves had fallen, so that they didn't actually contaminate the surface. But they did put it in that sheltered location, so that protected them. And they didn't have any problem with utilities. Utilities are something you want to check out thoroughly too. Hopefully you'll have a plan of if you've got any underground utilities that you need to be wary of, because that can get expensive. The trees we've discussed, the access to the arena, this is an important point. You don't want to be walking your horse to the arena and run the risk of taking debris in the horse's hooves on your lovely new surface, your new footing. Likewise, you don't want to be taking maintenance machinery in there that's been running over, you know, soggy turf or mud in the winter time. So bear in mind that it would be a very prudent step to install an access track, which doesn't have to be overly an expensive exercise, but it's just something where you can approach and keep the wheels and the maintenance machine clean, and also you're not taking debris in and out from, you know, not taking debris in on your horse's hooves. Other obstructions, think about, you know, basic things like, well, we've already talked about water pipes, but like water troughs. You might have concrete feeders if you've bought farmland. I don't know, there's all sorts of things. So just bear in mind that that could be an additional cost if you have to get some of those things moved. And I think also bear in mind that materials are delivered in obviously trucks, and it's less expensive to use larger trucks, semis. They can take a lot more in terms of tonnage than the smaller truck, but your access has to be big enough to allow that truck in. So do bear that in mind too, because that could be a cost saving if you can get that semi in rather than have to go to a smaller sort of dump truck, because obviously you're going to need more loads and therefore that'll push the price up. And the last little point we've got here is how to improve current footing without starting a project from scratch. So I think in essence there, it really depends on your base and is it sound? Because if it's the old adage, if your base isn't right, it doesn't matter what you put on the top, it's going to suffer. So if your base isn't draining properly and you get a torrential rain, then you can't ride on your footing for 3 or 4 days. That's not, as we know for all of us, that is not ideal. And so if you want to look to improve a current footing, then I would get that reputable contractor to actually check out your base and the drainage runs before you start to spend money on improving a footing, and then find that you've made these improvements and adding something like a fiber to a sand, and you've still got those old problems. The base has to be right, it has to be sound, and it has to drain freely. So I think that too is very, very important to bear in mind. Types of soil. The main sort of types of soil we have are a sandy soil that you find, say for instance in Florida, and some clients in Florida and just over the line into Georgia have actually done what we call an as-dug situation. So it's as dug out of the ground. And where budget is restricted, they've taken the top grasses off and got to a level area of sand, of as-dug sand, and they've actually rototilled fiber into that sand just to give it a bit of stability and a bit of strength and a bit of cushion. You then find, and I know that this varies from state to state, but I'm just trying to think of the basic ones that we deal with, a sand and loam, which is going to drain nicely. And then you've got clay. Clay is obviously a slightly more tricky one to deal with because there are various types of clay. And if you find that you're in an area where you've got very heavy clay or even gumbo, I think it's probably a sensible thing to obtain an engineer's report if it's very, very heavy, and if you're worried about what we call clay heave, or the clay actually moving. Because an engineer's report is probably the best amount of money you're going to spend, because an engineer's report, they will dig trial holes to see how far down, and they normally go down to 8 feet and beyond, so you can see what's going on well below the surface area. With the sand and loamy, your sand loam type soil, you're going to save a little bit there, because your stone layer isn't going to need to be so thick. Whereas on a clay, you're going to need to stabilize that clay. If it's got a lot of what I call soft spots, in some instances we've had to dig the soft spots out and pack those with a cheaper pack stone before then a stone layer goes over the top. But again, a reputable contractor will know your local substrata and be able to advise you correctly on that. And that picture you see there, that is, I'll come on to that, but that is actually of a cut and fill, because the way that we build is we don't build into the ground, we build out of the ground. So we're not building a swimming pool. So we'll cut from the highest point of the land and then level up the lower point. So you'll probably get what we call a batter. And there's another photograph which shows that really clearly for you here. You can see the bank on the left-hand side there as I'm looking at the photograph. That was actually a 20-foot bank. So we had to cut and then fill up on the lower side. So you've got the run that goes down towards the arena, the level arena, and then the batter off on the far side. And this was actually for a farrier who looks after the British team in the UK. So the cut and fill process, very simply, is as it says on the slide here. It's from cutting into a bank, and that can vary, obviously, and relaying the material lower down the bank to create a level, what we call a level formation. The banks and slopes must be created correctly to support the new formation. So you don't just take a whole load of fill material and lay it without actually compacting it correctly. And again, the contractor that you use will go through that process with you and explain it to you if you can't put the arena anywhere else apart from a place where you've got that fall, you've got that land that's sloping. But just remember, and again, this is probably an obvious one, the rule of thumb is the more level the site that you have, the less expensive it is going to be to build that outdoor arena. And I can't stress enough that if you build the base right, then that arena is going to last you. It might cost you slightly more in the initial stages, but it's much better to build it right first time than go for a cheaper base and it not work. And as I say, it doesn't matter what surface you want to use. If the base isn't right, the surface is going to be, or the footing is going to be compromised. The next thing that we come on to is, once the arena is cut and leveled, is the drainage aspect. Now this varies, as I said before, according to your subsoil, your type of subsoil. Sand or sandy loam soils require less drain runs, as we call them. Clay or heavy clay will require a more intensive program, because what you're going to want to do is take surface water away from your arena. Now, we normally lay our drain runs about every 30 feet, and dependent upon the fall of the land, which way it falls, those drains then all connect up to what we call a perimeter drain. And that perimeter drain then leads to outfalls at the lowest point of the arena, and that takes the water away from your ring. Cut-off drains, and what they mean is, if, for instance, in that last photograph where we talked about that bank, if you were on a piece of land that had a very long fall to it, you can put a cut-off drain to buffer the arena. So you put a cut-off drain a little ways away from the arena and fill that with a drainage pipe and backfill it with clean drainage gravel, and that will act as a buffer to try and catch water coming down the hill before it gets to your arena if you're on quite a steep slope. The normal drain runs that we put in, and that again depends upon the substrata, but normal are a foot-by-foot trench with a 4-inch perforated pipe, and then that is backfilled with clean drainage gravel. And I mean clean drainage gravel, and they go by numbers, and I know it varies from state to state, but for instance in Kentucky it's number 57s, and you don't want any fines in there, no dust, no fines, because that will prevent what you're trying to create, which is a clean drain run. And in some instances we line those drain runs with a thin geotextile liner. And again, the width and depth of drain specification will, it will vary dependent upon the type of substrata, dependent upon the fall of the land, and your local contractor will be able to advise you in greater detail on that. But I think it's important, as I've said many times before, to talk to him about that and what his drain specification is going to be, how he intends to lay it, and what the spec is for the size of pipe. In some instances where you've got heavy clay, we have been known to put a 6-inch perforated pipe on the perimeter, for instance, with a fairly good slope to it, just to be able to get that surface water away. But as I say, he should be able to talk to you about that in greater detail. And that picture that you see there, you can't see the drain runs going across. You can see the one on the outside, but you can see the thin geotextile there over which the stone is starting to be laid. And we'll come on to that in a little while. The type of stone to use, and preceding that, the membrane that goes over your cut and fill in your drain run. So once your cut and fill is completed and your drain runs are installed, we tend to use a thin geotextile membrane to go over that cut and fill area. And it's basically to keep the clean stone clean that you're putting on top of your cut and fill and your drains. So we use a thin membrane. It's a geotextile, widely available, and that it comes in rolls, and you roll it out and overlap it by 6 inches. You don't need to heat flame weld this one on the bottom, because obviously the weight of the stone is going to prevent it from rising up. Over which we lay a stone blanket, and it effectively is your base layer, your stone drainage blanket. Again, the type of stone varies from area to area, but you want an 1.75 to 2 inch angled stone, so that when it's rolled in, it rolls in, and when you look at the arena, it's going to look like a billiard table or a pool table. It's going to be absolutely smooth right the way across. And the type of machines that we use, we don't use wheeled vehicles. We only use machines with tracks, that are on tracks, And the reason for that is that a wheeled vehicle, when it turns, can actually disrupt all that stone layer that you've just laid and rolled in. Because once it's installed, we then roll it and track it in. We either roll it with a big heavy roller, or we'll track it in on an excavator on tracks so that it's consolidated. Again, the stone has to be clean. You don't want any stone with any fines in it. And, you know, don't be afraid to reject a load if you get two good loads that look really good, and then the quarry sends you one with some fines in it, because that has been known to happen. And if you've stipulated that you want, or the contractor stipulated that the stone has to be clean, and it turns up and it's got fines in it, you can reject it. The depth of stone layer really depends on the type of substrata, as I've said before. On heavy clay, sometimes we put a compacted 6 inches of stone. On a good sandy loam, the minimum we tend to lay is a 4-inch depth. And the type of stone, that varies from state to state too, because you can get some very clean, good angled stone that will track in really quite well. And it's going to be, for instance, the type of stone I know that they use down in Florida is very different to that we use up here, say in Kentucky. Also think about your climate, because you want a stone that's going to be resistant to frost penetration if you're in those colder climates, because a softer stone, once the freeze takes place, you can sometimes find that softer stone will actually knit. As it's knitted together, it will start to disintegrate, and then it will just seal, and then you've got a sealed base, so it's not going to drain. And the shape and the size of the stone we've just talked about. A good limestone is ideal if you're somewhere where you can get it. In some instances, people use granite. And I know that in Florida, some of the contractors down there can find a really good stone that's actually a reject stone, but it's a good angled stone and it goes in very, very well. So again, your contractor should be able to talk you through that and help you with that. And the picture that you see following that, this is how we tend to build. We extend that stone layer outside of the arena. Now, one thing I will say here is that this is not the least expensive way of building a ring. And I know that a lot of people have built what I call outdoor rings on what I call sealed bases. And those have drainage that relies on either a fall across the arena or a crown on the arena, so that when the surface water lands, it either scoots down the fall and comes out at one part of the arena, or it falls and the dome or the crown in the center means that the water is going to dissipate from the center of the arena. These were always the type of rings that were being built, but there is a big re-educational process going on, that you do actually have an alternative, and it doesn't have to cost the earth. Might cost you a little bit more, but you'll be able to ride on your arena and not lose those critical days where you have to either look at your surface migrating on a fall because the deluge has happened and you see your all-important footing scooting down the arena because it's migrated with the water on a crossfall. Or in the case of a crown, I always think they're more difficult to maintain with that crown in the center. And I'll cover that a little bit more on maintenance and how you can check your depths, etc. So yes, doing this type of base is going to cost you more initially, but it's going to last you longer, and you're going to have least amount of risk of losing days, not being able to ride on your arena. Moving on. Now, once your stone layer has been installed, you have to think about what you're going to finish off with before you install your footing. Now, I know that in certain instances, and again, it's a cheaper way of doing something, but sometimes people will install a smaller stone and then put the footing on top of that. But over a period of time, it might work, but over a period of time, you're going to get a surface migration down through the stone, or you're going to find that you're going to get little stones that will eventually work their way up and come up into the riding surface. And then that is a bit of a nightmare situation to deal with, because then the only way to deal with that is to scrape off what you've got and then install something like we're looking at now, a membrane over the top. Now, long gone are the days when membranes would go down and you would see them start to work their way up through the riding surface or shrink back from the sides from the retaining boards. Those days have gone now, because these new membranes are needle punch, so they've got a very good porosity toleration. And what we do is, as you can see in these photographs, they come in rolls. And again, this geotextile membrane is widely available. Comes in rolls. You roll them out, roll your rolls out, and then you heat flame weld the joins. So that prevents the membrane from working its way loose and coming up into the surface. And you can see there one of our guys actually doing it with a blowtorch. You don't want to do it, you don't want to be too fierce with it and burn a hole in it, but it will actually seal it. And then in the second photograph there, you can see that we stretch it to the retaining board, and then we fix it. You can either, we tend to fix it with roofing battening. So it's not going to shrink back, and it's not going to then work its way up through the surface. I think you can see that fairly clearly on that picture there. And again, these are very strong membranes, and as I say, they're needle punch, so the water will go through them, and they're very durable. Fencing. Now, there are so many different types of fencing, and again, talk through the specification. You might have an idea yourself of what type of fencing you'd like, depending on your equine discipline and the area that you live in, the state, the climate. There are many different types of fencing, and we've put in a few photographs here. So the first one is of a dressage type fencing. It's where we use 2 2x8 boards, and there are posts there as well. That the fencing is the boards are fixed to the posts, and then on the top we put what we call a feather edge capping. And in some instances, the clients like to paint them white because aesthetically it's more pleasing. Sometimes they're left plain. You can use railroad ties, but again, be very careful there, because on those joins on the railroad ties, you're going to lose footing out through the joins if you're not careful. There's the classic post and rail fencing, which you've seen in that previous photograph when we were talking about the cut and fill. And then on these two photographs here, I've shown one that is what I call a hip height rail. So it's not necessarily a 3 rail post, but it's hip height, and it's finished off with a capping on the top. And again, I've just popped in here a round pen that's totally enclosed, and some people like to do this type of fencing on a round pen, and there are different types of material you can use, obviously in timber, but this way, you know, you've got, it's more from the prevailing weather conditions and also for concentration. And then another type, before we move on to the footing itself, is you can get plastic fencing these days, and there's a UPVC plastic fencing that's very popular. It's got a good UV resilience. It's easy to construct. I'm not sure what colours it comes in. It only used to be in white, but I know on the running rail, I think you can get black and maybe brown. Yeah, brown, sorry. And we did actually put a running rail up in green in one instance, and that looked really pretty. But they do like a post and rail type fence. They do a balustrade. So they've got several options for you there. So that covers your fencing. But again, talk to your contractor about it and see what's available, what's suitable for your climate, and get some costing options. Then if we move on to the footing, obviously the ideal type of footing has always been turf because it's a traditional surface. However, it is difficult to maintain in perfect condition. And under ideal conditions, it is the blueprint for synthetic surfaces. It can be affected obviously greatly by climatic conditions. And years ago, when Martin Collins developed the first surface, he wanted really to develop a surface that was going to replicate good going turf. That's always been his aim and his goal, to be able to produce a footing that was going to replicate good going turf. The requirements of a synthetic riding surface or a footing: it's got to be safe, and it's got to be sympathetic to the limbs of the horse on which to train and also compete. It's got to be consistent, and that means it's got to be consistent from one end to the other and from side to side. It's got to be durable, so it's got to be able to withstand the elements, and you can see that in the next photograph down, in a complete downpour where it didn't alter the going. It's got to have good climatic tolerance, and when we talk about that, if you say to me, or you're going to ask me, you know, like in the winter, I mean, is it going to freeze? To be very honest with you, any footing is going to freeze. It depends on the amount of water or moisture it's holding at the time the freeze takes place. We have found that with a fibre rototilled into sand, because it's rototilled into the top 3 inches of a compacted 4 inches of sand, you still have a little bit of cushion there. And we have also found that the wax coated footing has got a good climatic resilience to that colder weather. And I'll cover that a little bit more in maintenance. And again, for you, it's got to be easier. It's got to be a synthetic footing that's easier for you to maintain. That unfortunately, there is no such thing as a maintenance-free footing. They all require maintenance, and we tend to send out a DVD to our clients, and we also talk them through a maintenance program, and we'll come on to that in a little while. But I think for here, a surface has to be safe and sympathetic, because at the end of the day, you know, we're asking more of our horses these days, and we want to keep them sounder for longer. We don't want to be having to maintain them in terms of joints and other such things. You know, we just want to keep them on the road and keep them safe, keep them sound, and keep them sound for a long period of time. Because if you're a competition rider, your horse is going to be competing from a young age, hopefully to an older age, and that's a long competition lifespan. If you're a rider at home and you don't compete so much, you know, you still want to be able to care for your horse, and you want to keep him happy in his work, and give him something that he's going to be happy on which to work. So it's more sympathetic again to the musculoskeletal system, to him. Maintenance. Yes, as we've said, there isn't such a thing as a maintenance-free surface, unfortunately. They all require maintaining, and it is crucial because a footing is a moving part. And so how often should it be groomed? Well, very much this is on a common sense viewpoint. When the surface first goes in, I would go more overboard on it whilst it's in its first year. And again, it depends on how many horses are being worked on it and what type of work you're doing on it. If you've got 1 or 2 horses at home, you're probably not going to maintain it every day because it won't need it. But if you've got 20 horses on it, then yes, you should be grooming it every day. It doesn't take, I mean, I do tend to do mine on a daily basis. But again, it's really down to common sense. And we talk now about, although it's the last point on here, a drag versus a groomer. A drag was a drag for just dragging, for instance, a sand surface around, for want of a better way of talking about it. You drag the sand surface around to kind of re-spread it. These days, with more sophisticated footing, you don't want to be dragging it because you want to be keeping it as level as you possibly can, so you don't start throwing your levels out where you end up with 3 inches in one place and 7 inches somewhere else. And you want to be grooming it, so you're just grooming it to keep it level and keep it consistent. There are various types of grooming equipment on the market, and dependent upon what footing you put in, that will really lead you on to what type of grooming equipment you want for that particular footing that you decide on at the end of the day. And again, your contractor should be able to help you with that, because there are various types of machines available. Most of them will go onto the back of a 3-point linkage on a tractor, but some of them, as you can see on that photograph, that's what we call an arena master. And it's quite a heavy piece of kit, and it comes in various widths, and it's designed just to keep it was designed by Martin actually for training tracks in England, and we then scaled it down for arenas, and it's been on the market now for, golly, well over 20 years, although we've modified it. But again, I'll come on to a couple of little things that you can do. The moisture level for dry surfaces, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a sand and fiber, sand and rubber, sand and another type of additive. You have to keep those surfaces moist or watered so that they ride to their optimum performance level. If you don't, you'll find that they'll dry out and they'll become cuppy, and the level, they'll ride looser, and the levels will get thrown out more easily. Types of irrigation for dry surfaces. There are many different types, and again, your contractor will be able to talk to you about this. We were to have Austin Wood of Diamond W contracting with us this evening, but unfortunately, Austin's not terribly well, so he wasn't able to join us. But I would have brought him in on a lot of these slides to talk to you about different aspects from a contractor's point of view. But there are various different types of irrigation. There is overhead irrigation, and that can be from a variety of means, from cannons to sprinklers to a water bowser. No, you don't call them bowsers here. Water tank tank on the back of a tractor that sprays water on topically, to underground irrigation systems. And they feed from below the surface up through into the footing. Now, those types of underground watering systems have a very different base. They don't have a stone base underneath them. They're irrigated with pipes that are then covered with a sand covering. And I'm not going to get too technical here, because if you want details of who to go to for that, then just email us and we can let you know. They do save on the amount of water that you use in the long run, probably, and they will save you on your stone, because obviously you don't need a stone blanket with them. And they run and are fed by an electrical system that adds water in automatically when it's needed, and shuts it off when it's up to the level that it needs to be to keep that footing moist. But as I say, I won't talk too much here about them, but we'll be very happy to give you details of the contractor to go to who can help you with that. And again, if not watered enough, sometimes they can also become too hard. Because that depends on the type of sand too, because some sands, if they're not watered, just actually get very hard, whereas some with an additive in them just get soft and loose and cuppy. So you've got both ends of the spectrum there. The wax coated footings actually don't require an irrigation system. They're more expensive to install initially, but if you're building from scratch, you won't have to think about an irrigation system for them. And there's the picture of the Arena Master, which, as you see, it has a roller at the front and a roller at the back. The two types of surfaces, I very often have to talk to different bodies and be very objective, not only talking about our footing, but what types of surfaces are on the market. And I feel that I should just tell you a little bit about what's available in the marketplace and just what we have. If your budget, what I was going to say to you, if your budget is a restricted budget, you're much better to build a good base, put a lesser expensive footing on the top, and then bear in mind that you can improve that footing at some later stage. But do build a good base to begin with, and do try and find the best type of sand that's available for you. There are so many sands out there, and you can't always get ideally what you would like, but a good sand would be one I would suggest that is not too coarse, because a coarse sand will not bind. It's loose by its nature. If it's a coarse, gritty sand, it's not going to bind. It's going to be looser. It's going to be more difficult to maintain. A coarse sand also is abrasive. So think about that if you've got horses that aren't shod. It could be abrasive to the horse's feet over a period of time. Try and find yourself a sand, and again, your contractor should be able to help you here. Try and find yourself a sand that's of subangular in shape. If it's a round particle sand, it's going to move like marbles. I know the particles are terribly tiny, but they will move like marbles, so just bear that in mind. If you can try and get a good subangular sand of varying particle size, then that is going to interknit and bind a lot better when it's wet, and you'll ride more off the top of that than you will into it. And again, if it's got a little bit of a silk clay content to it, that you don't want too much of a silk clay content, so because it's gonna block up your base. But that again will aid you in the stability. And then you can always add to that at a later date. You can always add fiber into it at a later date for more stability, cushion and energy return up through the leg of the horse. So there's your simple sands, and then there are lots of additives that can be added into sand. There are a whole plethora of fibres that are available in the marketplace now, and those, for instance, ours is called cloth, and it's a fibre that is derived from the carpet industry. It is not old carpet that's just ground up. That is available in the marketplace. Be very careful, because it could have all sorts of not terribly nice things in it if it's old and just been ground. Ours actually has to go through a manufacturing process where we take out all the stuff that is not required and not wanted. So you don't want wool, for instance. You don't want bath mat material or cotton, because they are going to rot. You don't want nylon, because that could cause, and we have heard this, could cause static on your horse's shoes. We actually put our fibre through a process by which we are left with what we want, which is a fibre that's not going to rot, not going to break down, and is going to have longevity to it. And our cloth fibre has been on the market now for 17 years and is proven, and both our products actually have FEI approval. It's a fibre where you need to start out with a compacted 4 inches of sand. Now, I know that sounds an awful lot, but what we do is not in a competition environment, that's slightly different. In that environment, for instance, we would pre-blend the material, but normally the sand is installed to a compacted 4 inches, thoroughly wetted and rolled, and I'm going through this very briefly, but we can always give you more details. The fibre comes in big bales, and it is then spread evenly over the sand. It is then rototilled very slowly into the top 3 inches. You can set a tiller, and I actually did this myself with a client, her dad, and a friendly local farmer. So I have actually done this physically. We actually spread the fibre by hand, but our guys tend to use a manure spreader or a Harley rake to do it. But I have actually physically done it with rakes. You spread the fibre very evenly. It's then thoroughly watered and rolled, and then we slowly till it into the top 3 inches of sand. And then we roll that, and then we repeat the watering, tilling, and rolling process, and then it's ready to go. We probably do that. It depends actually the type of sand and how well the tiller works, but it can be up to 3 or 4 times that we'll till it, and then it's ready to ride on. It produces what we want to see in the sand, which is a root structure. And again, this goes back to Martin wanting to develop a surface that was going to replicate the root structure in turf, because the whole idea behind this is that the fibre teases out during that rototillering process, and that aids stability, it gives cushion, and that all important energy return and shear, because the horse's hoof, when it lands, has to, as we all know, has to be able to move slightly forwards in terms of its locomotion. So that's the fibre. The wax coated footing or coated footings that are available out there, there are various ones that vary from state to state. Excuse me. Ours is called MC EcoTrack. Again, it has a good climatic tolerance. It is a footing that is pre-blended, so it's not something you add into sand. It's where we take so much of each, and there's a recipe. And the recipe for Florida, for instance, would be very different from the recipe for Pennsylvania or Colorado, say. And we pre-blend it, It's shipped either in super sacks or in bulker trucks, and it is laid outdoors on a free draining base, the one I've just described to you, because we work on vertical vertical drainage. So the water falls from the sky, it penetrates through the surface, through the stone drainage blanket into the drains, and the water's taken away that way. The wax coated products are more expensive initially to install, but you do get a cost holiday in as much as if it's starting from scratch, you don't need an irrigation system with them. They're not going to rot, they're not going to break down, and they're not going to require what I call topping up. So you're not going to lose footing where you can lose it in other instances, and then you have to top up every so often. You don't need to top these surfaces off. The oldest one we've got here is actually here in Lexington, Kentucky, and it's on an outdoor, and it's now 10 years old. It'll be 11 years old in 2018, and we're probably going to have to recoat it, which we do in situ. It's getting a little bit dry now. So I think that gives an overview of the dry versus the coated product. And there you can just see an imprint there of the hoof. What sets Martin Collins surfaces apart? Longevity, I think. We've been a long time in the business. Martin probably invented the first one about 40 years ago. And without going into reams of story on it, he started off, we all ride. So we all know what we want from a surface. We all ride in Martin Collins. And he actually used to show jump. 3-day evented to begin with, and then show jumped, and was a pretty good show jumper. So he knew that he wanted to invent something that was going to be safe and consistent for the horse, that would last. And he's gone basically from adding PVC granules into sand, which gave sand a little bit more of a protective element in the colder weather, to coated products, to fibers, and he's always looking down the line what's going to be around in the next 5 years. But at the moment, with the fiber that we've got, he's very happy with that, and it's working very well worldwide, because we are a global company now with a strong influence in, say, South Africa, Australasia, Middle East, Europe. So that particular fiber is a big seller globally, as is the coated product. We do have a proven track record. We don't do anything else. We don't make fencing. We don't, have any other add-ons. I mean, they do have a turnkey operation in the UK where they can start from scratch and build your barn, etc. But we don't do that here in the US because it's too big. And we also in the UK have our own teams of chaps that build arenas, whereas here the country is so big, we decided that what we should do is team up with reputable, good contractors that we would put our name behind. So they run their own businesses, but they're experienced in installing our footing. We wanted a surface that was going to be more sympathetic to the limbs of the horse, keep it sounder longer, and keep it healthier, and also keep it happy. You want a horse to be working on a surface that it's going to be happy working on, not something that's going to be jarring it. And I also say to prospective clients, as a guide, go and walk or run yourself on a surface. It might sound completely daft, but whatever you're feeling up through your leg is an indication of what your horse is feeling. So if you're thinking to yourself, ooh, ouch, this is catching my calves. Ooh, it's pulling my calves a bit. Like if you're on a beach and it's hard work getting through it. Well, think about your horse's tendons in that instance. If you walk or run on a surface and you think, oh crikey, that's hurting my shins a bit, you know, shin splints, think about your horse jarring it. So that's a very simple thing to bear in the back of your mind when you're trying to decide on a footing for yourself. Think about something that's easier to maintain. It's not taking you hours to keep it maintained, but you are going to have to maintain it. There's no such thing, as I said, as a maintenance-free surface. And what I also advise our clients to do is every 4 months, and funnily enough, I was talking to a lady in California about this afternoon. Every 4 months, take yourself, mine wasn't posh to begin with, it was just basically a screwdriver. And then my farrier built me something, a probe. But I tape it up 2, 3, and 4 inches. And every 4 months, go around your arena, have a blank piece of paper, and go around your arena and take readings, say every 15 feet, and push your screwdriver down very carefully so you don't push down through your base, but get to your base and then record that depth on your piece of paper. And I go around the track, down the quarter line, up the center line, down the 3/4 line, and then I'll take some random depth checks. And I write them all on that piece of paper. And that will show me if my levels are starting to go out. So I might think to myself, oh, I need to be maintaining, you know, of circles now more towards the left, because you should alternate. And again, we help our clients with that. So just think about the maintenance side of things, and that's what we focus on with our clients. And also we like to think that we've got exceptional customer care. So we don't just sell you a pound of fibre or sell you a surface and then we go bye-bye. We expect our contractors to be on the end of a phone if their client needs help, and we expect to be on the end of a phone if you need help from us. So we do pride ourselves on that, I have to say. And there we've just got a couple of pictures from the UK, actually. That's at Windsor Castle. There's a big arena there where they hold the outdoor Windsor Horse Show every year. The next photograph actually is of a surface that's a coated surface. Actually, it's in the Middle East and it's been down quite a few years now. And I think really that probably brings me to the end of the presentation. I mean, we have a footing guide, and I think, Chad, everybody's going to get one, aren't they, on that slide?
Yeah, everybody who's registered for tonight's webinar will get one sent out to them tomorrow by email. So you'll get a copy of that.
And we hope you find that of interest, and it's got lots of info in there for you. And I'd just like to thank everybody, and I just hope that this has been helpful. You'll see we've got Austin's contact details there. He's actually based in the Carolinas, but he does travel quite extensively. So please feel free to call him or email him, or call me if you've got some questions that you'd like some help with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Glynnie. Just to let everybody know, this webinar will be recorded, so you'll be able to refer back to it at a later time. We'll send that as well, that link to you as well with the footing guide as well. If you have questions, and if you haven't already done so, you can type them into that chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can tonight. There's a couple of come in that we'll start off with. Excuse me. So the first question is, if I'm in the northeast, how can we prevent drainage pipes from freezing and bursting?
Drainage pipes. That leads me to think that they must be solid pipes and not the plastic perforated pipe. I think probably, if it's okay, who is this from? If you'd like to, the person who brought up that that question, if you'd like to email me, that would be, I'd like to just go into that in a bit more detail with you, and I think we could do that on an exchange of emails, if you'd like to do that. And my email's very easy. It's here on the screen, glynniewalford@martincollins.com. Please do email me, and I'll go into that in greater detail for you.
Okay. So another question is, we're considering building a new arena. Are you able to help us source appropriate sand, stone, etc. from local sources for our arena build?
Yes, we are. And what we would need from you, and again, please email me, we can help you. We find out where you are in the country, and yes, we can certainly help you source the right sands.
So another question is, if we already have an arena that has a decent base, and it already has a sand footing to it, are we able to add cloth or another material to it to kind of upgrade it from what it is now?
Absolutely, yes. What you can do is, if you'd like to send me, mail me a sample of your sand. If you email me first, and just tell me who you are and where you are, and then I'll email you back with the address to send the sand, and then we can take a look at that sand. We can actually add the cloth fiber into the sand sample for you, and we can mail that blended sample back to you for your evaluation. Now, what I would say there is, please bear in mind it's a very small sample, so it's just indicative of what it would be. You might start off with a lesser. You can always start off with less fiber, is what I'm going to say, and add more in at a later date. You can do that, and we do have clients that have done that. So please do bear that in mind. But we have rates that we give to people as guidelines. And obviously, if you're just doing flat work and you've got a good binding sand, it's less fiber that goes into that than if you're jumping on it, where you're going to want to add more fiber to increase the strength when you're jumping a grid, for instance. So do send us a sample of that sand. We can do that blend for you and mail that back to you. And hopefully you'll find that of help. And it's a free service, so please do take advantage of it.
So this person says, I have a limited budget and looking to build an outdoor arena. Where should I invest my money in to start with?
Okay, very simply, invest in a good base. I can't stress that strongly enough. If you've got a good base, you can always upgrade your footing at a later date. But if you shortchange on your base and then you start to find you have problems, you're going to have to redo the base, or you're going to have to tweak it. And we get this a lot. Unfortunately, I do get phone calls from people who say that they've used a contractor, they put the base in, they can't get the contractor to come back and look at it. He's not answering phone calls, he's not answering emails, he's disappeared off the face of the earth, and they've spent their hard-earned money. And we put our arena in and had to work to a budget, but we made sure that we put a good sound base in. And it is a story, and it really it distresses me that, and I do tend to take it to heart, that because I've had to do it myself. And you work hard for